Hello everyone. Welcome to the first ever QPOC Fest, where we celebrate books by and about queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So a couple of just like maintenance things. So we have in the description of the panel, you'll find links to the rest of the festival agenda, and you can go from there to find the scheduling for the rest of the festival and access the panel links that way. We also have a link to our bookshop page so that you can purchase the books of either me, Aiden, or any of the other authors participating in the festival. I obviously am Emery Lee. I am the author of Miku Diary and Cafe Con Lychee, as well as one of three co-creators of QPOC Fest. And I am here today with our fabulous keynote speaker, Aiden Thomas, who happens to be both one of my favorite authors and also one of my favorite people in publishing. So Aiden Thomas, for those of you who do not know, is a trans Latinx New York Times bestselling author of young adult novels. They received an MFA in creative writing from Mills College. Originally from Oakland, California, they now make their home in Portland, Oregon. Aiden is notorious for not being able to guess the endings of books and movies and organizes their bookshelves by color. And we also can note the fact that Aiden is known for having and singular lychee in their fridge.
That's true. That was very sad. Oh my God, I forgot about that. God, yeah. Last time when I was drafting the Sunbearer Trials, I was in a dark place. I have Red Bull, a single lychee here. I don't know what's happening. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
It's like I feel like the best way to summarize like what I'm like, oh yeah, Aiden's like super fun, but also chaotic. And everyone's like, what do you mean? I'm like, wow.
His fridge looks like that of a frat boy sometimes.
You know, I was like, very college, but it's okay. in a fun way, in a good way.
It's so bad. I'm trying to like get away from that. I've like started this, I'm in my like office and I've been starting to like redecorate it. And it's funny because I have all of my like pretty professional stuff like in front of me and didn't think about how just like all of my like nerd like anime stuff and pins would just be on display behind me. So welcome. This is a crash course in what I'm like.
I'm sure it is wonderful for everyone to be able to like see the real you in your natural habitat.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just as chaotic.
I also want to tell everybody that if you have any questions or comments throughout the panel, feel free to leave them in the chat box. We will get to any questions at the end if we have time. But make sure you keep your comments appropriate. If there are any issues, you may be asked to stop participating in the chat. So please just keep it appropriate, be polite, be respectful, and let's have a good time.
Hell yeah.
Yes. So I'm like, anything you would like to say before we get started, Aiden?
Not really. I mean, just thanks for having me. I was so excited when y'all reached out about doing this event. So I'm just like, I'm just so excited to see the panels and everybody. And I was scrolling through the agenda and I was like, oh my God, Violet. Oh my God. It was so exciting for me to see everybody.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously like this is a relatively like niche type event in publishing because this is a very white industry. But I feel like it was genuinely such a great thing to be able to get so many people together and realize how many like queer people of color are really stepping into the industry and just like making it great. Yeah. And like, so of course you are kicking off the festival. So you are the first face people are going to see when they step into QPOC Fest, which I think, I think that's particularly spectacular. Both because again, like I'm just a huge fan of your books, but also because, I see you as very much like a pioneer as far as introducing a lot of new types of queer POC like books into publishing. Your debut, Cemetery Boys, launched in 2020, which was what we kind of called like the trans renaissance. It was when trans books first started getting—
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, it was like the first time. Yeah, it was the first time you really saw like a large number of trans books at once, and also trans books that, like Cemetery Boys, were able to step beyond just the basics of what is identity, what does it mean. And so like something that I wanted to like get started with on that is like, what was it like for you, like stepping into the industry as like someone who was kind of coming into this space that wasn't quite ready for us. But what was it like getting started and kind of like paving your way up until like, and then up to like reaching this point where you are now?
It's been absolutely wild. It's funny that you even mentioned all of that, because when I first entered publishing, the first book that I sold was Lost in the Everwoods, which is a book with an entirely white cast, and I don't talk about gender or sexuality in it at all. And I was also hadn't come out yet, so as a trans person. So it's funny because I kind of entered the world of publishing in a very different atmosphere, and even a different identity than what I currently have. Um, and that I'm sure that having a white kind of cis het book really helped me do that. So it's really just interesting. And I remember being so nervous to tell my editor. I was like, hey, by the way, I'm actually trans, as it turns out, and like blah blah blah. And I was, it's so nerve wracking, because publishing can be such an unfriendly place for people who are not, cis straight white people. So I was really just like nervous that I was like blowing it by like coming out as a trans person. But my team was like, my editor was wonderful and like very just like wonderful. Okay, thanks for letting us know. And then in I want to say probably like 6 months after I got my book deal, I went to get top surgery. And my whole publishing team sent me a care package along with like the authors in my imprint that just had like supplies for recovering from top surgery, that ended up being incredibly helpful, because like they sent me a back scratcher and I was like, I don't know how this is going to be helpful, but okay. But after you get under anesthesia, the like 2 days out, you get so freaking itchy. So that freaking back scratcher like saved my life. And they sent this really cute card that I still have. It's in my bedroom, that had a treasure chest on the front, and on the inside it had congratulations on your new chest, which I thought was incredible. I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. So it's funny to kind of see how I started and how scared and nervous I was to like where I am now. And like, even just, I am so thankful and appreciative of the team that I have at 501 Freds, because they have always taken really good care of me. And yeah, I just never in my wildest dreams thought that this would ever happen, that this many people would know and have read my books, and to be like so excited about them, because I was like, okay, this is a very niche story. I like, maybe I'll get like 25 people to read my book, and that's going to be really cool and exciting. And I think what really opened my eyes was that there's actually a lot more trans folks out there, especially in the book world, than I ever could have comprehended. But also that we're really opening up kind of the world of kidlit, and that it's not just the trans readers, it's not just the Mexican readers who are reading my stories, it's everyone. And isn't that like a really cool and beautiful thing? So yeah, it's really exciting, and it's so exciting to like finally have this community where it's more than just like me being like, hey, like, can I hang out with you guys? Like, we really are like a whole force to be reckoned with at this point. I am still like really close friends with other queer authors of color from like my debut year, and it's, especially as a pandemic baby as I was in the book world, it's been so nice to have those other authors to kind of like rely on, and who are going through the literally exact same things as you. It's really, I feel so thankful, and it's, yeah, I'm so excited with how far we've come since I even entered the world of publishing, and like what we're like gearing up to do. It's really wonderful.
I think it's kind of interesting because you mentioned too, like being really good friends with people from your debut year. I think it's interesting how like convenient it is, like I guess like when you're first coming into the industry, to like have all these people that are just kind of like in that boat with you. But it's interesting how we tend to stick with people who debut around the same time as us, which like I think is like, I don't know, like I feel like there's obviously some sort of like trend going on as to like why exactly that is, but I think it's also kind of I think for also to a certain extent, like for like us as like queer people of color, part of that is just when you look at some of the earlier debut years, like where were the people of color? Like where was the melanin?
You know what's really funny is that like I made friends like in my debut year from like us like DMing each other when something like wild was said on like the main page, and we were like, "Are you seeing this?" And then someone else would be like, yeah, let me bring in my other friend. And like, that's how we like started the group chat. So it's still a wild industry, that's for sure.
That is. And I think it's interesting too, because it's like we're making progress all the time, but at the same time, it
Yeah.
also feels so slow and sometimes we stagnate so much.
Yes.
Yeah. So something that I wanted to like, I guess like segue into is like, how does it feel like, looking at like the community, looking at like where we came from and like where we're hopefully going? How does it feel knowing that there are so many like queer, trans, BIPOC authors who are using your books both as like comps to help them break into the industry, but also as like encouragement and permission to be able to even write their own stories to begin with?
It's the coolest thing ever. Yeah, I'm still shocked whenever anybody knows that I exist. So whenever like the PW announcements come out and like Cemetery Boys is a comp title, I'm like, everyone shut up. What? It's like the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. And then I just get so excited because, I wrote Cemetery Boys because I love those paranormal, spooky, like especially with a romance angle in it. And so to be able to see more books like that come out, that was a pretty quiet genre for a while, but now we're finally getting like a lot of paranormal stories coming. But not only that, but to have it be like queer writers and writers of color, it's so exciting. I feel so honored when my book is used as a comp title, and like whenever it is, I'm like immediately like replying to that person's announcement and being like, "Hey, when you have arcs, I would love to read it." And it's just, I think that might be like one of the best parts of my job is that I get to read so many arcs for authors, and I get to read all these really amazing, really like innovative stories that are so different than what's out there right now, coming through like a BIPOC lens. And to not only do that, but then to be able to read it and support it by giving it a blurb and then being able to like scream about it on the internet. I love being able to do that. It's like one of my favorite parts of my job. My publisher and my agent, I'm sure, wish I didn't do it as much as I do, because I try to do like 2 to 3 a month, and they're like, "Aiden, please write your book," and I'm just like, I would rather die. Like, I'm just gonna sit here and read art instead. So yeah, that's a really really fun thing for me. And oh god, yeah, it's so exciting to even just be in conversation with these authors like through our work, not even necessarily like in person or face to face, but just to kind of be building this lexicon together is just so much fun.
It is, right? And I think it's interesting. I mean, so like obviously I feel like to a certain extent it's extremely surreal, right? That you're like that so many
Yeah.
people are like looking up to you, right? Like
Oh, it's bananas considering like how much of a child I feel like I am. Like I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's wow, it's mind blowing.
right. And then I feel like also to a certain extent it's like interesting because trans authors and trans books I feel like are getting a lot more attention now than like they've ever gotten before. But we're
Yeah.
still relatively rare. Like there's still like in
Yeah.
comparison to like obviously like cis authors, it's kind of wild. But like at the same time, like I feel like, we are getting a lot more like trans stuff like in like the paranormal element, the fantasy element, and then like same thing like because like of course I like my first book was a trans rom-com, and like
Yeah.
I'm getting like some of those now too, like those are like starting to like build up, and I think that's like really exciting because it's like when I was writing Meet Cute Diary, there were no trans rom-coms. There were
Yeah.
I don't even think there were trans books that just weren't purely issue books like at all released at that point because I was writing back in 2018. So like yeah, and it's like now we look around and we're like, holy shit, like holy shit, like
It's the coolest. Especially, I'm especially excited about all the horror that's coming and like really putting itself in the forefront. I'm like, yes, give it to me. Yeah, but you're so right. It's so exciting to kind of see and be able to explore and have a breadth of different books to pick from, right? Like a kid doesn't have to like walk up and be like, okay, which problem novel am I going to read? It's like, no, we have horror, we have fantasy, we have rom-coms. There's so much for kids to pick from now, which I'm so jealous of, because when I was when I was a kid, they just didn't exist.
Yeah, yeah, they did not at all. And I think it's
Yeah.
interesting too because it's like I remember even like 5 years ago, someone was like, "Oh, like can you recommend me a trans book?" It'd be like, "Okay, sure. Here are like the 3 trans books." But like now
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, can you recommend me a trans book? Oh, what genre are you looking for?" Like just even being able
Yeah.
to say, "What genre are you looking for?" Like that's nice. That is refreshing.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to see because like again like as queer people of color like it's so rare that we're the ones allowed to pioneer anything in the queer space. It's almost always white
Yeah.
queers who like lead the way, and I think it's nice to see, especially I feel like in the trans space, that a lot of trans people of color really are like leaving a mark right now, and I think that is super super cool.
Yeah.
So something that I was thinking about too is like the way specifically that our stories are in conversation with other stories like within the community. And
Yeah.
like everything that I write, like I know like when I start like writing, I think about like what other books like have released recently and like what they're saying, how like what I can say can either contribute to that or like be in conversation with that. So I was wondering like how do you approach like being in conversation with like other like QTBIPOC authors and like what does that like mean for you, I guess, to be in conversation with other authors?
It's so funny because I was just talking about this the other day, but it's so interesting. I feel that across different BIPOC experiences, there's a lot of these kind of universal truths or kind of unfortunate circumstances that we're all pretty familiar with. So I love to be able to read a book by another, queer author, and I'm just like, yeah, we're like talking about the same thing. And that recently happened with me. I was, oh gosh, I can't remember what the name of the anthology was called, but Soko Jackson's had a story in it, a short story in it, and I read it, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, this is what I'm trying to talk about. And I think I'm pretty sure I DM'd them or I DM'd him in my head. And I was like, I just read that short story and I thought it was so good. And I thought it was in conversation with something I'm working on. So it's fun to be able to like literally reach out to those authors and be like, yeah, right. Um, so that's always been a really like fun and rewarding thing for me, and I have those experiences kind of across the board. I feel like anytime I read anything by Kaylin Barron, I'm like, yeah, this. um, oh gosh, and it's just there's so many different authors that I feel that way with. I feel it with you. I feel it with Sonora Reyes. I feel it with Johnny Gazavia. I feel it with Lizelle Sandbury is another author whose writing is like incredible and kind of really touches me in a very specific way. There's also another person who I'm obsessed with is Darcy Little Badger, who wrote like a Snake Falls to Earth, and those are stories that aren't following the same kind of like Western storyline that we're so used to kind of being force fed down us. So it's so cool to see those similarities and ways that we connect with each other on like a cultural level, but also just like on an interpersonal level, and see that and how they're so different in our stories, but how our stories are still like in conversation and still touching on those really like those like baseline human experiences almost.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was funny because I was literally talking to Jason June the other day because
Oh, Jason June. Love
right.
Jason June.
I don't remember which book we were talking about. We were talking about one of our books, and we were just like, man, we're like, how does it keep happening that like every time one of us releases a new book, we're like, wait, my book was, I was literally just talking about like this exact thing that you're talking about here. So I was like, I don't know what happened there, that we just like ended up on the same exact wavelength and we just keep matching
Yeah.
up. But like, it's very cool. And I think it's also just like, I think it's very fun to know that like the topics that we're coming at are being arrived at from a different angle, but like by other people at the same time. Because I think sometimes readers see like a book and think, oh, this is like the whole experience. This is all there is, right? And it's like there are so many different ways to approach any topic. So knowing that we're like have all of these people who are like, reading our work and then like realizing that we're all on the same page and we're all kind of just like doing our I think it's very nice knowing that readers have like one like that like choice of like what whose take they want to look at and whose take they want to like vibe with, I guess. But then also just knowing that like we're continually furthering these conversations like communally.
Yeah, and I think that that's like the fact that we're like trying to impress upon people that like, hey, we don't all have this same experience. And I think that's also just kind of similar to storytelling in general, right? Because it's like, if I said write a ghost story where a boy falls in love with a ghost, and I could say that to literally everyone who is participating in this event, and we would all come up with incredibly different stories with different takes and different angles based on our different lived experiences. Like there's never a monolith. There's not like one book that represents like the trans experience or the Mexican experience or anything else like that. So it's really it's just yeah, it's just exciting. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
cool.
it is, right? It is cool. I'm gonna go a little bit off script on this one, but like I feel like something that I think about too is like the way that um I feel like there's kind of this like expectation that like a story is gonna give you like all of the answers, right? Like if you're
Oh yeah.
questioning your gender, you could pick up a trans book and that trans book is going to tell you like how to find your gender and like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's what the expectation of like a 101 like textbook is like odd when it comes to fiction because like as you were saying like talking about like authors who deviate from kind of like western expectations, it's like historically our people have told stories to like pass messages, to like share history, to like be in conversation within our community. That was where our storytelling came from. So like when we write our stories and they're all in communication with each other, I don't feel like it's like one story passing on like a lesson. I feel like it's all of these stories creating the dialogue that makes the collective conversation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes 100% sense. Yeah. And you're absolutely right, because it's just multiple voices having a conversation.
Yeah, and I feel like the more I look at like the YA canon and the more I see it like expand as we each add to the conversation, the more I feel like, because people always talk about how like books teach empathy and they're important to like learn from each other
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's more than just like an book, right? Like it's more than just what one book itself is doing, but more so
Oh yeah.
like community growth that we're bringing about just by having all of these conversations going all the time and learning from each other and building off of each other and like.
Yeah, and it's funny because I would say that that sense of community is not something that's very Western. It's not something that's very American, who loves American exceptionalism, and it's not. It's a very kind of white societal of like this competition thing where it's like I feel like for BIPOC folks, it's like no, the community is what like gets you through everything, and that's the important part, is you take care of each other, and that's how you move through the world. So I think that that's very much reflected in stories and books too, because it's not only just BIPOC folks but also queer communities. Found family, we talk about that all the time, and it's just another version of that, the importance of the community taking care of each other as opposed to the individual.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So I want to continue like on this like topic of like community. Like in regards to like other like QPOC like authors and creatives, like do you feel like you have found your community and like how do you feel that like community has shaped your experience like in publishing and just like I guess like everything in general because like you're saying like community everything kind of comes back to your community, so like how do you feel like that
Yeah,
community has helped you grow?
I think it took a really long time for me to feel like I was part of any community within publishing, and that's because of my multiple marginalizations and the intersections of my identity. It's kind of, when you're a part of so many groups, it's hard to feel like you're a part of any of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, especially at the beginning of my career, I was like, there's like two other trans authors that I know of, like within this whole world. And then, if I wanted someone who was BIPOC on top of that, I was like, there's nobody. So I felt very kind of lonely and like I didn't fit in for a really long time. But then I mean, one of the very few nice things that came out of the pandemic was that suddenly we were all on the internet. And so instead of like, well, I have to meet someone in person in order to like get to know them, it was easier for me to like reach out to people who had books coming out and be able to support them, but like also just like get to know them as a person. And then like I wasn't able to go anywhere until last September when I got to go on tour for the first time but it was for my third book, and getting to like meet authors in person, including you, and being like, oh my God, yeah, you're real and we exist. And like, how cool is this? It felt like meeting like old friends that I hadn't seen in like 15 years or something. And that's really, it's just so wonderful. And I feel very much like I am within a community now. I feel very, yeah, just kind of like safe and secure, I guess. And like, it's just so nice. Cause yeah, I was struggling a lot with feeling like I was very alone within the publishing world. And now I have so many people to turn to when something starts going wrong or if I need advice or something like that. It's, yeah, a game changer. It would have, I don't know how I would have gotten through the pandemic without everyone.
I feel that. I feel like, yeah, I know people like all often say like, in publishing, you like finding your community is everything. But I'm like, I think people like,
Yeah.
it's like, even though people say it a lot, I still don't think people get how like true
Yes.
that is. Like, yeah, like it's, there are so many things. I mean, one, there's so many things in publishing that go wrong, but even when things go right, like I feel like you can feel like even when things are going well, you can kind of feel like you're just like a voice in a crowd. And
Yeah.
like I feel like it's like, the people who are like actually going to be there to like celebrate with you. Like I remember at Y'all West, I was literally like I was like tearing up, like getting into your signing line, because I was like, oh yeah, signing like, because it's so nice to be like, like, and I feel like it's like too, like as a kid, I always dreamed of being an author, but like I always dreamed of like doing the events and stuff, because I was always like going to author events, like this is the coolest thing ever, like I want to be that person. And then so to be like, oh my God, my friend is that person, like I'm here in this really cool signing line for my friend. It's amazing.
Isn't it mind blowing? It's like every time I have an event, I'm just like, wow, like yeah, I love it. Also the energy of those really big like book festivals like Y'all West is just, it's delicious, is what it is. It's so nice. It's so much fun.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you're on social media a lot, the book community
Mm.
can seem like a really like rabid, aggressive, and like unfriendly place. I think like we have a
Yeah.
tendency, like there's new discourse every week. Everyone's like subtweeting each other. Like there's like a lot of like, and like, there's a lot of like competition between people sometimes too, where you're like, okay,
Yeah.
you're all like lashing out of jealousy, right? And then you go to like Y'all West or like any of these festivals, and it's like everyone's singing Kumbaya, like everyone like loves each other. Suddenly, like people who were like subtweeting each other yesterday are like, making amends and like hugging it out. Like, what is going on? Like, but I think it really does show the way that like we as authors, even though everyone's like, oh, like we're like loners, we like to do it all by ourselves. I think it really does show the way that like we are thirsty for like people who
Oh my
get
God,
us, we
yeah.
can connect with, we can just like, really have those connections with. And I think that that's something that like, I think when people, and this is like not even just like publishing, but just like, America, right? When people come to realize how important community is, how important it is to like respect each other, love each other, understand each other. You know what I mean? Like we will ascend at a whole
Yeah,
level.
it changes the game. It really does.
Like, yeah, yeah. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about Graveyard Goods because I'm
Yeah.
obsessed. When you launched that project, I was like, this is officially the coolest thing ever. And like, Aiden is my favorite person. And I'm like, I love like, obviously like the aesthetic of the whole thing. I love the art that you put out. Like that, the merchandise is top tier, like already, like it's excellent. But then like, I love that it also is like supporting charity, supporting artists, like building them up. So tell us about Graveyard Goods, how it got started, and like what your ultimate like goals and like I guess dreams for it.
Yeah. So Graveyard Goods, it's a merch store that I run through my website, which is aiden-thomas.com. And it's definitely a passion project. How it's set up is that out of all the proceeds, 60% goes to the artist that created whatever the art is on the item, and then 40% goes to charity. And we switch that charity once a quarter, so like every 3 months. And it's always a charity that's supporting like marginalized folks. We do ASLU a lot. We did the trans law fund recently too. But what's very funny is that I really wanted to do it basically just because I wanted to provide for readers what I really like being a member of a fandom, which is like I like being able to have merch. I like being able to like wear it, especially the kind of like more low key stuff, but also the things I like people to see and like recognize in public and be like, oh my god, I read that book. That's like one of my favorite things personally.
Same.
So yeah, so I didn't own any rights. I still don't to Cemetery Boys, including anything to be able to like sell products for. So what I did was I like I like put my student hat on and I was like, okay, I'm making a whole presentation to show to my publisher and being like, this is what I want to do and this is why I want to do it. And so I like put this huge email together and sent it to them, basically asking permission to be able to use my own IP in the merch store. And they're like, yeah, this sounds really cool. Absolutely. So that was like the kicking off point. And yeah, it's just fun because I hire artists to put in different pieces. Right now, I'm working with 2 artists to put some new merch in there in the next few months. And we have like t-shirts and keychains and stuff like that for my books. But it's also where you can get the amazing character art that Mars Otterbaugh does. When the Sunbearer Trials came out, I trading cards of the demigods are like real within the world of the book. And I really wanted to have trading cards for my readers. And so my publisher paid for them, but me and my friends spent, I think, 32 hours randomizing all of the packs that people ended up getting in their pre-order campaigns. So when I say it's a labor of love, it is definitely a labor of love. And I just like being able to create community around my stories within the book world, but also to be like giving back to the communities that I am like even writing these books for to begin with, because like that's the whole point, right? So it's really super gratifying to be able to, you know, sign those checks every 3 months to send off to the charity. And it's great. And I just want to keep putting out like nerdy book merch that you guys like and supporting folks.
I love your commitment to the aesthetic, and I love your
Oh yeah.
commitment to like the fandom. And you're honestly like, I feel like there's like a handful of authors who really commit to like feeding their fandoms. And I'm like always so grateful, like as a nerd who's just like very like into like getting into like whatever fandom I follow. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, because I mean, like that's how I was, right? I was like, yeah, give me all of the Raven Boy stuff, like the Hunger Games. Yeah, I'll buy whatever you put a Mockingjay on. You know, it's like it's fun to be able to do that.
Yeah, like I have all of your merch, and like I like, you know, will occasionally just like look at like my favorite characters and like sob a little and be like, I'm so happy. But like yeah, I appreciate that. And I do love like again, like the fandom community that's built by like having like access to all of these types of things. But also like just again, like the fact that you're giving back to like, you know, charities and like the broader community like of just like marginalized people. And I think that that's like I feel like it's also great to like not only be able to access book merch, but to know that when you are buying it, you are also supporting marginalized people. It's top tier. Like
Yeah.
yeah, like I yeah,
Thank
no, like
you.
yeah. I'm like I hope like this becomes like a trend and like everyone like learns to like, you know, get on this kind of stuff.
Oh my God. Another thing. So on my website, on the merch store, you can go, if you bought my books and got like a book plate or got it signed at some point and it's now your dead name, you can go onto my website and you can get a replacement book plate signed by me with your real name for free. There's just like a form that you have to fill out and that's it. So speaking of trends of things, I would love it if other authors started making that as an option too. I use Got Print to print my book plates, and I think you can get it like 1,000 for like $30, and then it's just you know, a stamp to send it because it's just like a little that fits right into an envelope. So if you have the means, other author folks, I would strongly encourage doing something like that.
I feel like that's starting to like catch on because I'm starting to see more and more
Good.
people like yeah, I know. I'm like, oh my God, like let this be like the new normal, like please. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so something that I want to ask is where do you get your inspiration as far as like your stories, but also your motivation to keep going when you get discouraged? Yeah, you know how it is here.
The big question. The easier question is the first part. And I kind of get it from really random places, and it's
Relatable.
mostly just daydreaming. Yeah, so like for Cemetery Boys, I've told this story 1,000 times, but back in the day, so back in like 2017, which was still a little late to be on Tumblr, but I was on Tumblr a lot. And then I would follow writing prompt blogs. So they would just like throw out a prompt, and then just to kind of help exercise my brain, I would read those and be like, oh, is this anything? And I remember it was like in the middle of the night. It was probably like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like laying on my bed, scrolling through my phone. I'd probably dropped it on my face at least 2 to 3 times at that point. And I saw a prompt, and it was just one sentence long. And it said, what would you do if you summoned a ghost and you couldn't get rid of it? And everyone was like replying and like reblogging with like these like creepy paranormal activity type stories. But when I read it, I was like, yes, what would I do if I summoned a ghost and I couldn't get rid of it? And what if he was really cute? And that was like the entire inspiration for our Cemetery Boys for the plot. And then from there, I was like, well, if I'm really gonna like write about my identity, then I'm gonna write about Dia de Muertos because it is my favorite holiday and it's a really important time of year for me. So that just kind of like went hand in hand. But then you have, like Lost in Everwood, which is a very dark retelling or reimagining of Peter Pan and kind of what happens to Peter and Wendy after the events of Neverland. But it's set in like contemporary small coastal town in Oregon that's like an hour and a half from here. And that one was like from watching Peter Pan 2003. I watched that movie, as we all did, and I was like, I'm obsessed with this now. And then I went back and read the original Peter Pan, and it's super dark and violent. And I was like, oh, this is not like the Disney cartoon that y'all have led me to believe is the truth. And then so from reading that book, I was like, oh, these characters are pretty messed up. And then from there, I was like, I can play with this. And like, made Lost in the Neverwoods. But then you have like the Sunbearer Trials, which I feel like is a conglomeration of like my fandom obsessions, like the Hunger Games, Percy Jackson. There's a lot of My Hero Academia in this one. And then just like my favorite character dynamics from like animes and stuff like that, and be like, okay, well, what if they were in this world and doing this? So it kind of comes from all over the place, but a really big inspiration and what helps me kind of when I'm stuck break out of it is like content that I like consuming, especially media, like TV shows, movies, books, of course. And it's funny because it's like whenever I get stuck, I will watch something that's like in conversation with the story that I'm trying to write. And it's funny because I hear from a lot of authors, they're like, oh, I can't read anything that's like in the genre that I'm writing. And I'm like, that's all I want to read. Because I want to get excited and like inspired and like see someone do something and be like, oh yeah, and then what if like this happened? And then letting it kind of bloom into its own idea. So yeah, it's a lot of like consuming art around me, and then that I always find that so inspiring. And yeah, that's how I get unstuck when I'm stuck. I mean, other than like forcing my friends to help me think through it and come up with a solution, it's really, yeah, just being like, what was the last thing that I read that excited me? What was the last song I listened to? And kind of like chasing in, being like, all right, what can we do here?
I love your like mention of like the fandom inspo for the Sunbearer Trials, because I felt that the entire time I was reading it. I was literally like as I started reading it, I was like, okay, this is fun. And then like I feel like the second like Aurelio gets like introduced, I was like,
yeah.
I was like, I already know this is going. I know this is going. I was like, you're already like building it. Oh, I was like, stop. So like, of course, for me, like as like again, like as like a fandom like nerd, I was just like, I was like, oh my god. And then from that moment, of course, like, I could not look away. I was like, I'm gonna die if I don't like. Which like, yeah,
it's
like
fun. And I love a tournament arc, and there's so many in anime. It's the best.
Yeah, and like the rivalry, like the passion
Yeah.
of the rivalry, that's everything. That's
Oh,
like
yeah.
like the number one thing I learned from anime is that you can always make like the tension
Oh,
better if
yeah.
you just add a little bit of rivalry. Like perfect.
It's so
Like,
true. It's so true.
okay, so my final question for you is: what are some things that you would like to see in the future, both for in terms of your own career, but also in terms of QPOC in publishing as a whole?
Gosh, I think most of like what we've already talked about, I just want more stories across all of the genres so that our younger generations don't have to have the problem of picking between three books. So that's what I really want. I just want to have more BIPOC representation and especially more queer together. Both of them together is even harder to find. I just want that. I want it filling up the shelves. I'm especially excited to be getting more like BIPOC takes on dark academia because I think that's a really fun genre and one that's often kept BIPOC people out because, like in real life, we are often kept out of institutions that cost a lot of money in order to learn. Uh, so that one's a really big one for me. Horror, which I'm so excited that we're having a horror moment. That's really exciting for me. And as far as my own career, I kind of just want to keep writing my silly little like queer books. I'm excited because I feel like it's funny when you first enter publishing, your publisher is like, you need to have a brand. And like, this is the kind of story that you write. And we want to get you like comfortable in this brand. And then you can start branching out. And I feel so bad for my publishing team because it's like, I gave them a fantasy retelling and then I gave them a paranormal romance. Now here's some high fantasy. And then I have a sci-fi and a rom-com contemporary romance coming up. So I'm kind of like all over the place. And like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to like just chase the topics I'm really excited about. I would also, I think like later down the line, I would really like to teach writing. I think that would be fun. And I would also really like to get into like screenwriting, like storytelling through like animation and stuff like that. I think would be really, really fun. So yeah, I have a lot of big dreams.
I love hearing about your dreams. One, because I want all of that for you, but then two, because there's like you have like this. I'm like you and me. We're like on the exact same page. Like we're like okay, I want all of this. Like yeah, because I'm like I just feel like I think publishing would be more fun if they would just allow us to embrace a little more chaos, right? Like let us do like let's go all over the map. Let's just like go where like wherever the ideas take us. I think that's where we get the most creative. Like
I agree. Like, let me chase the plot bunnies. Like, don't try to rein me into only the like ghost bunnies. Like, I have so many other bunnies.
I want all the bunnies. Like, please.
I want all kinds of bunnies. I want to collect them all.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to put them in the chat box. One that I saw is this one, which is, what do you consider to be your biggest influence to create the voice you use in your books? Voice is hard. Voice is like, yeah, that's hard. So
it is so hard. It's really funny because I was just talking about this with my friends the other day. My writing partner, Alex, they helped me get my books written. And a way that we do that is, or that helps me, is coming up with the jokes to kind of put into chapters. And so it's funny because me and Alex will be like sitting here going back and forth, coming up with these really like ridiculous like dialogues. And then my other friend Max will read it later and be like, yeah, I can hear you guys like laughing in my head those jokes. I'm like, yeah, right. So that's a big part of it. But I also on my block, which is on Netflix, that's a huge impact on me as an author, because when I first saw the first season, it was like right after Cemetery Boys had come out, and I was like, this is like the TV version of Cemetery Boys. Like, it's these kids that are in East LA trying to just move through the world without in one piece. And it covers like these really heavy and dark topics, like I often do in my books, but it's also deeply hilarious. The dialogue is funny. The actors are incredible. So that's like one of my favorite shows where I'm like, okay, where's my voice? Because like I need to have writing that's funny. So I'll usually like pull up on my blog and like be like, okay, yeah, here's the silliness that's coming back that I need. Um, that's it. Yeah. So that's a really big one on me. And I think a lot of the like bad jokes are just stuff that I like think of. And I do watch Archer a lot. I've been rewatching Archer because that has like really just like horrible jokes in it that are like very much my cup of tea. So when I'm like, oh, what am I even doing here? I'll like watch that show and I'll be like, oh yeah, this kind of situation. Yes, this is what I like. The chaos of it, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And I'm trying to think what other ones. The Raven Boys was like a huge impact on me as a writer, especially earlier in my career. And then Zoraida Cordova, dudes, like, oh my God, she like opened my world to the like idea that I could even write a fantasy that was like about my culture. And that was a huge, huge game changer for me. So the Brooklyn Blue House series has a very special, deep place in my heart for sure. Yeah, that was good. That was great. That's a good question.
I love that you mentioned the Raven Boys because I was like, that was a big one for me too early on. I'm like,
Yeah. That was
yeah,
a cultural impact.
yeah, right. Okay. Well, what do you think about the most banned books in school libraries are by people of color and queer books? I really mean like, why do you think?
I mean, we know because the ruling class hates anything that's different and they want to remain in power. And those people are white, cis, and straight. So that's what they're going to keep perpetuating. Book bans are really frustrating. Cemetery Boys is banned a lot of places. And it's funny because when I first heard about it, I had like a very flippant response to it. And I was like, oh, well, you know, whatever, I'm doing something good, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Like if my book's being banned, then I'm doing something right. And then when my friends called me in and was like, hey, you know, it's like, sure, it impacts you as an author, but like the real problem is that it's keeping those stories out of the hands of kids who need it. And so that kind of, I was like, oh, okay, I'm actually being an a-hole about this and I need to like lean back and like figure out this situation. So it's so hard because it's like we put the weight of the world and our expectations onto the shoulders of teenagers, basically, you know, the younger generations. And then we've set up a world that is really unfriendly to them, especially for the queer and BIPOC kids and teens. And so it's I feel like I have let them down when stuff like this happens. But you know, we try to fight as hard as we can. And I think for me, the most important part around book bans is making sure that the kids who need these stories who are living in these different areas get support and get access to those stories. So that being said, I try to really support when I hear about banned book clubs that like teens are organizing. I try to like be able to send them books and stuff like that. Oh God, I was going to say something else. I don't remember what it was. But it's like supporting their efforts. You know what I mean? Like doing what I can to like give them access to those books, but also to fight for the rights to have those books. And it's funny because no, so I'm not going to say spoilers because I'm going to talk very carefully. But I've already seen the cover for the sequel to the Sunbearer Trials, and it's the gayest cover I've ever had. But that being said, I was worried because I do get teens and young adults who will reach out to me and be like, hey, is this book safe for me to have in the house? And what they mean by that is does the blurb mention something about transness? So the cover is really beautiful, but going back to my merch shop, me and Mars are working on an alternative cover that would be stealth, so that and we would like at a very, very low price so that people could buy it and put that cover on and it wouldn't have any mentions or allusions to queerness in order to have it as a safe book for that kid to carry around. So for me, it's doing stuff like that, like what's pragmatic, maybe like small and kind of insignificant things, but that could have a really big impact on an individual. So yeah, that's how I try to move through the world of book bans right now that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think like something that people have been kind of like asking too is like, oh, like why is it that people seem so like, I don't know, like into the idea of like stopping literacy? And it's like, well, it's obvious because
Yeah,
kids who don't have the knowledge to fight back can't fight back, and that's what they're going for.
exactly.
And so yeah, I do think that that's one of those things where it's like the reason they don't want us, the reason they don't want anyone to know about like queer people and people of color and that we can thrive and be happy is because as long as teens can't fight back, as long as teens aren't aware that they can fight back, then they cannot fight back.
Yeah,
And so I think also part of it is just, you know, taking the opportunities where you can to like be like, you know, like making yourself visible and just like showing like that we're still
yeah,
here and like, you know, kind of just
and
continuing on. It's
thriving.
right, exactly. And I'm like, it's hard because you know, like again, like the more people get in the way, the harder it is to kind of keep going. But I think
Yeah,
I did see like a stat recently that was like most book bans, like most of the challenged books are coming from a very small group of people.
yeah,
Because only it really, and I think that that's important to know because we tend to reach these points before we reach like pivotal change, where things get really bad before we start to find that like light again. So I also like to just hold the hope that we are there and that we're like, you know, right on the cusp of
yeah.
something better. Um, but yeah, that is the time that we have for today. But thank you so much, Aiden, for being here,
Yes.
for sharing all your insights, and generally just like bolstering fandom.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for having me. This was literally so much fun. So yeah, thank you. And I'm so excited to watch the other panels today. It's going to be freaking awesome.
It's freaking awesome. So, as I mentioned before, you can find the link to the schedule in the description on this video. If you follow that link, you'll find all the links to all of the other panels so that you can watch those, including the ones that start at 10 o'clock. And you can also find the link to our bookshop in order to buy books by Aiden, me, or any of the other authors who will be at the festival. So thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you for your questions and your participation, and we hope you will continue on to enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thanks, y'all.